Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to talk about the State of Holy Priest number 2 as we finally received our Power Word update, and I wanted to start talking about some of the changes that have happened to the spec and what you can start expecting as we're getting into beta and soon to be getting into raid testing. There's been a crazy amount of changes across the board, both to the class tree and to the specialization tree, and so when we dive into it, I wanted to take a look at some of the major changes that have affected it and how the gameplay is going to work. First and foremost, it used to be that there was a lot of renew synergistic traits that were able to be taken in the class tree that I was assuming would start being reflected in the spec tree to build up a really heavy renew playstyle, but that has since been cut out. When it comes to the class tree at the moment, you're still able to have access to things like Shadowmen, Shadow Word Death if you wanted to have them, the damage playstyle, but now you're able to have things like Vamp Embrace, which heals a nearby ally for half of any single target shadow spell damage you deal, which last I checked, Holy Priest does not have a lot of, and you have to just have a crazy heavy committal. So there's some already very, very weird things like that. Furthermore, Shadowmen is actually quite strong on a 15-second cooldown, with Depth of Shadows allowing your dots to be able to further amplify its output. It does reflect into Echo Healing, but it does not have any synergy whatsoever when it comes to Holy Word Serenity. So you can kind of have to weigh that cost benefit on that one of casting a very chunky, very large, powerful heal, much stronger than Flash, but at the same time, you're not going to have access to any cooldown reduction for when Holy Word Serenity wants to come back. So there's some cost benefit, but I really like the spell as it stands at the moment. You still have Power Infusion, Self-Power Infusion if you want to cast it. You're still able to go down the path towards Mind Games, and there's a couple new additions coming into play here. You have Void Shift, which is a 5-minute cooldown and incredibly fun to utilize. I'm so glad this got brought back, but I hate having the two options guarding it. Crystalline Reflection is terrible in particular, just very, very poor. But Void Shift is great because it swaps health percentages, which is particularly good on something like Necrotic. It's also just a very convenient life-saving tool whenever somebody's low, but you also do get other life-saving tools with Holy Word Life. Now they've made it a 35% health breakpoint. They massively increased the amount of healing that you're able to get out of something like Holy Word Life by 400% more. And if you successfully do it, the cooldown of Holy Word Life is reduced. You no longer actually inflict damage onto yourself, which is really, really awesome. And to be able to go through that, you take Surge and a defensive in Angel's Mercy, or you get Binding Heals back. They did actually remove the previous version of Binding Heal, the 3-target heal, and that is dead once again, which is kind of a good thing because it was either too good or just garbage, and they never really found an in-between for the spell. This class tree is a lot better, but there's some more tweaks that I think need to be made in order to actually bring it forward. You have things like Vamp Embrace, which are just terrible for Holy Priest. You have Void Shield, which is all about refreshing your shield's value, which can only go back to its original value by just dealing damage. So your shields are small enough already, so you'd have to immediately begin dealing damage in order to get value out of it. It just doesn't seem like any sort of good talent you'd want to bother taking, and you must go down that path, down Mind Blast, cooldown reduction path, in order to get to Mind Games, which I guess is just a hard committal to PvP. This affects Disc more than anything else, but it's still weird to have these talents which don't really seem to have a place whatsoever for Holy Priest. When it comes to the class tree, there's been crazy amount of adjustments and everything like that, but most notably, you're getting some really, really good options early in the tree, and they've pretty much alleviated the previous problem that you could take everything before you got to the final tier, and the final tier was where you made all your choices. You actually do have a lot of choices, and again, this is not some end-all be-all build or anything like that you have to worry about. In fact, this is just the class tree where you're playing around with for dungeons part of the time, and I believe this is what I was playing around with for raids. So when it comes to our M+ setup, we were running with something along those lines where we were actually skipping Prayer of Healing and Holy Word Sanctify entirely, and Circle of Healing entirely in favor of a really, really heavily damage-focused build. We were able to take Archbishop Benedict's Restitution, which is giving you the Cloak effect, allowing you to res if you die and go into angel form. Awesome, freaking fantastic. Guardian Angel competes with Guardians of Life, allowing you to have a spirit to watch over you in addition to your target. This is a artifact trait, I think, from Legion that they brought back, which is really cool to see. Not a ton of use cases for it, but it's cool that there's an option at least, and you need to be able to take that in order to take the Crow Cloak. You either need to take Benediction, probably wouldn't take Holy Mending, but you take one of those, and then you're able to take Divine Hit. With this build, we were messing around with, or also going into Holy Fire, the Holy Fire cast time, cooldown, and then you can actually make such a really heavy committal towards single target healing, which you previously were not easily able to do. So with this, we go down the path for Trail. There's a new option called Everlasting Light, where heal restores more health based on your missing mana, which is fantastic for attrition healing, which is going to be really noticeable as well if you ever get into challenging boss fights in high dungeons. So I hope that we have a lot of challenging dungeons to be healing for next expansion, because this would be fantastic. You still have some things like Crisis Management, increasing the crit strike chance of Flash Heal and Heal. And then you get into a really single target focused tree at the very bottom. Crit heals from Flash Heal and Heal, which you just spec'd into with Crisis Management. With Pontifex, they increase the healing done of your next Holy Word spell. So since you're casting a lot of Flash Heal and Heal, you're able to get more Serenities out. Very good synergy on that one. Light of the Naru, more synergy with cooldown reduction for your Holy Words. Resonant Words you're already familiar with from Shadowlands. More healing after a Holy Word is cast. And now we have Lightweaver. And if you didn't see this, Lightweaver is basically Flash Concentration, but you don't have to stack up pre-pull or constantly throughout the dungeon in order to achieve value. You cast one Flash Heal, you can immediately cast a heal to follow up. You get a reduced cast time for your heal and increases its healing done, but you can actually just sit there and hold a couple charges if you wanted to. So when I was running these dungeons, I was able to mix in Lightweaver with all the potencies that we just selected, and I was able to mix in Shadow Mend by multi-dotting really heavily to benefit from Depth of Shadows, where Serenity was obviously the highest single target heal, then it was Shadow Mend, and then it was usually heal unless heal crit, which did quite a lot because I did have all these buffs going into it. You're also having the Trail Cleave that's going on. This Prismatic Echoes is actually ridiculous, increasing the healing done to your mastery by 30%, which is usually really high amount of your healing, especially at the beginning of a tier. So I 100% think this one's going to get changed or nerfed or something like that. And then you're able to go into the Imperial Blaze that we saw previously in the last build, where you can pretty much have endless Holy Fire duration on one target. But most importantly, you can very easily multi-dot as you like. From here, I do like being able to go after Apotheosis, but you do have a lot of points that you'd have to fill in order to get there, so I opted to skip it, going after more damage out of Smite and Holy Fire and all that goodness to be able to take either Miracle Worker, which is a PvP talent formerly, giving you an additional charge of Serenity, which I think is very good in dungeons, and you could also go after Divine Word. I still am not a massive fan of Divine Word. There's a lot of benefit from the crit components. I will admit, and it might be just better to take it than Miracle Worker in a dungeon environment, because those crit benefits are going to be incredibly good for buffing your Serenities, increasing the healing that they do from Pontifex. It also allows you to benefit from Inspiration, you see on the left side, where Flash Heal, and Serenity crits are going to reduce your target's physical damage taken. So this could further give support to a tank taking heavy damage, which a lot of times they do at the start of expansions. So there's so much synergy when it comes to a single target build that has really refreshed my hope in Holy Priest going forward into Dragonflight for dungeons. With this, gameplay was actually pretty interesting on this one. As I mentioned previously, and you'll be able to see on your screen here, there were a lot of times where you're pretty simply able to multi-dot as much as you really want and be able to very confidently push health pools back into healthier zones and healthier areas as you're walking through. Overall, these dungeons didn't really deal a lot of damage because we're on Heroic and they didn't want to have anything be too terribly punishing, and we're still waiting to see what Mythic Plus is going to be able to offer you. But already from the get-go, you have support in case somebody drops incredibly low, with Holy Word Life, which you can pretty much hold on to for emergencies. Serenity, you're constantly able to fire and pop off with. You could potentially play with Miracle Worker, so you're pooling and you're holding on to one Serenity charge for emergencies, but I don't think that's really necessary because Holy Word Life is quite good. It's still kind of hard to use at that 35% health breakpoint, so you end up holding it a lot. But your other options at the end of the tree, specifically having to go through bad defensives like Light's Inspiration, which is a hot tied to Desperate Prayer, not very good. Crystalline Reflection, not very good. Fade Cooldown Reduction, not very good. So you have all these sort of like 2-point gates that prevent you from actually going in to take other options. And that feels just pretty terrible as you're looking at it. So even if you're holding on to Holy Word Life, even if you're dedicating and spending a lot of points to commit to this, it still is very worth, because that allows you to more freely and more openly pop off with your Serenity charges whenever you want, and your baseline heal effects from Flash Heal and Heal have oodles of synergy between, I want to say like 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 different talents that are buffing your single target output, and you can so easily skip things like Sanctify, Circle of Healing that you don't really care about, Cosmic Ripple you don't really care about in a dungeon environment. So with all of this together, you can be incredibly focused on single target healing and being very effective at it, that this is actually kind of crazy how much it specializes the spec. Back in old talent trees, if you remember those, if you played back then, you could entirely change how your spec would play, determined by how you commit to certain abilities. If you were playing like a rogue, for example, you could also be dipping into subtlety trees or the assassination trees if you were playing combat, right? And that would allow you to start adjusting and messing around with your gameplay in very strange ways that I enjoyed when I first started playing a rogue back in Kata. Now, with this expansion, not all classes really work this way, and I don't want to say that Holy Priest is like the next big thing, but when it comes to a dungeon environment, they're able to really heavily specialize in single target when they need to, which will allow them to more easily and more efficiently be able to pump out big healing when it's required. For years and years, both through Legion and through BFA, Holy Priest really heavily struggled in that dungeon healing because they weren't able to specialize in it. And with this expansion, and going forward and beyond, it being able to do that without relying on borrowed power like Flash Concentration, which dominated all of your gameplay for an entire expansion where you just sat and cast heal, it's a really refreshing experience to not be forced into that position anymore. So huge value, huge thanks to the devs for bringing that to us. That being said, I'm a little bit worried about some of the dungeons because some of the bosses, despite their tuning being low, didn't seem to have too many crazy mechanics to be working on and didn't seem to have a ton of healing. So when we come to Mythic or Mythic Plus testing, I definitely have some high expectations and some high hopes that these dungeons are actually going to be challenging, because nobody wants to have another Shard of Halkias boss every single dungeon, which doesn't really challenge the healer, and then it becomes an arms race of who does the most damage. Historically, Holy Priest isn't always winning that, and when you don't have Boon of the Ascended anymore, while I don't miss it, I don't want to miss it because other people are just baseline doing more damage than me, if that makes sense. Now, I did also want to start talking about some of my ideas for rating, as there's a couple different options that you would have at your disposal. One of the ones I was looking at initially was on this right side. You don't have to worry too much about the class tree here. We're just going to focus on the specialization tree. Is how many synergistic talents are you going to be able to take for Prayer of Healing and Sanctify and an AoE centric style? They wanted to say that there's some balance, or there could be some strong balance between putting all of these renews all over the raid and being able to cast Prayer of Healing once again. You have Sanctified Prayers, which is increasing the healing done by your Prayer of Healing after casting Sanctify by 15% for 15 seconds. This has really good synergy with Prayer Circle, which we already know, for reducing the cast time and cost of Prayer of Healing, making it extremely efficient. You could also look at Prayerful Litany, which is healing one target for more, and it would be the most injured target. So you have a lot of different bonuses on hand. You also have others where Prayer of Healing has a 30% chance to apply a low duration renew. And you can also look at Healing Chorus, where your renew healing increases the healing done of your next circle of healing. Going further down, Orison, allowing you to heal an additional ally, reduce the CD of Circle of Healing. Circle of Healing has constantly been our incredibly mana efficient ability, putting out very solid output, very medium, moderate output for an incredibly low cost. So I could see very early on in an expansion, something like this, and a playstyle that's actually encouraging cooldown reduction for Circle of Healing and very specific uses of Prayer of Healing. holding decent amount of water. This is also allowing you to completely skip Chastise and Holy Fire, burning Vehemence entirely, and allowing you to very, very heavily focus on just healing. With this build, you'd pretty much have Shadowward Pain to buff up some Depth of Shadows healing, maybe, and Smite. And that would be about it, which I think would be kind of boring. But again, this is just for example's sake of what is actually possible with the spec. We do not know yet what Converted Followers is supposed to be, but it is interesting that it's positioned right above Symbol of Hope, because there's a lot of times where these abilities are going to have some kind of synergy that comes out. Kind of in opposite order, you'll have like Leap of Faith feeds into Move with Grace, Shadowmend feeds into Depth of Shadows. You know, you're going to be able to have Power Infusion leading into Twins of the Sun Priestess. I wonder if something like that is going to happen in reverse order with Converted Followers and offering an additional layer of utility when it comes to Symbol of Hope and the mana return that you're giving to your allies. Because we're having something very similar with Gales of Song, which is allowing Divine Hymn to heal for 15% more and increasing the healing stacks by an additional 2%. So this is going to make quite a nice little difference towards the healing bonus that the raid provides. And it's actually pretty good utility. After your hymn is going off, if there's still more damage, you're offering even greater contribution to your raid group to top everybody off. On the other side, I do think that this Prayer of Healing, and at least playing around with it on beta, even though we haven't gotten a chance to go into a raid group, it still feels very, very weak. But as I mentioned, Prismatic Echoes feels super, super strong. When getting all the mastery that you possibly can, like you usually do at the start of an expansion, being able to pretty much like blanket the raid in mastery if you're casting lots of Prayer of Healings could be very powerful. But this is also where the tree has its problems. While you're able to go like hard right and build a very damage focused setup when it comes to a key environment like we see over here, when it comes to trying to put together an AoE build, you kind of have to like awkwardly cross the street that is single target. You have Trail, Everlasting Light, and Crisis Management kind of blocking this sort of chunk almost of Prayer of Healing and Sanctify synergistic talents that is sort of just corralled into a corner off to the side. So it's a little weird, but I do like the idea of being able to take Everlasting Light to occasionally mix in heal casts based off of free flash heals that you would get with Surge of Light. So you could reasonably be using Prayer of Healing after casting Circle of Heal and or Sanctify to be able to very quickly cast a lot of Prayer of Healings, spreading very effective and efficient mastery onto a variety of targets, keeping Salvation, of course. Harmonious Apparatus specking into to give you more Holy Words on hand could be pretty nice, but I was thinking as well that there might be some other better options if the heals that you're getting, the flash heals, the heal bonuses that you're getting at a Lightweaver might be a bit more efficient in pushing you off to the side a little bit more. However, the increased healing by 12% on friendly targets at or below 50%, absolutely incredible option for progression, especially because a 50% breakpoint is usually like a life or death situation when it comes to mythic rating. If somebody is 50% and they're not topped off rapidly, that can easily mean death. And so the more healing that you're doing to push them above that threshold very rapidly is wonderful. Rapid Recovery, increasing the healing done of Renew, but reducing its duration, or Empowered Renew, where it's instantly healing the target. I think you're more likely going to see something like Rapid Recovery, especially with something synergizing with Holy Word Salvation, where all the damage is out right away. You want your Renews to be healing as rapidly as you can, and you're not having any other overheal protection when it comes to the Night Fate Covenant, because all that's gone. I am pretty excited to see if a sort of AoE-oriented build is going to be working out, but like I said, having this sort of odd street and this odd pathing where there's a lot of flash heal and single target talents cutting through the middle is very confusing to me. So I wanted to see if I could put together a build where you could almost effectively ignore or almost entirely ignore going after all this block of abilities, still taking Sanctify, still taking Circle of Healing, because they're very powerful and efficient abilities on their own, but ignoring a lot of the Prayer of Healing synergistic traits, and instead going down the path of just pure single target. I actually hate the apparatus selection there, so I'm changing that to Salvation. Compared to Harmonious Apparatus, I think the Desperate Times in a prog environment is going to be a lot more useful, and this could very well be a build that you could run if you go into another Kael'thas fight, where you're going to have to just bomb tons and tons of healing into the target. I don't know how often we're really going to see those, because those are usually like once every 2 expansions almost, but still, I think that there is some potential to a build like this, even though you sacrifice so much damage that otherwise should be really beneficial to the raid, but we'll have to see. My biggest complaints when it comes to the Holy Talent tree at the moment is you have a couple of options which are still just weak or plain bad. You have Say Your Prayers, where having a 15% chance to not consume a charge or Prayer of Mending is just laughable, especially when they put it at the bottom of the tree here compared to something like Prayers of the Virtuous, giving you an additional charge. In fact, I think you can actually get 2 additional charges out of this. Yeah, you still can get 2 charges out of this, compared to a 15% chance with Say Your Prayers. Like, come on. We know that that's not good. I don't really know why it's there. There's some of those options there. After Prayer of Mending, heals 40 times. Gain Power Infusion for 10 seconds. Holy Priests don't even want to get self-Power Infusion out of Twins of the Sun Priestess. And now we're being pushed into giving it to ourselves randomly without any sort of possible option to be able to actually control it. Now sure, you're going to cast like Holy Word Salvation and you'll almost immediately proc Power Infusion on yourself there, but outside of it, annoying to track, not really a great buff for the spec. I don't really know what's going on. Imperial Blaze, I really would love it if it actually stacked its damage, because the dot component of Holy Fire is usually not that strong, and you pretty much set up a limitless duration onto a boss fight, which often will kind of like bleed off or just be wasted, because there's no real way to benefit from all this stacking duration. It's just good to have the instant upfront damage, so you'll always cast it, but then the boss fight will eventually die, and there's nothing you're really earning out of that dot damage that you stacked up to like 5 minutes straight or something. Divine Words still doesn't actually do anything when you cast it, making it one of the few GCD abilities left that does that. You know, you'll have things like Apotheosis, instantly resetting your Holy Words, you know, but Divine Words does not actually do any of that, which is very confusing. Holy Word Serenity in a raiding environment doesn't actually net you an extra, or anything more than an extra charge in general, because you're pretty much never pooling any Holy Word Serenities, so it's a very situational talent, which is fine, but I do wish there was a bit better competition for Divine Word when it came to like a raiding environment. If you wanted to specifically have a good way to be able to spec very single target focused. But that being said, Salvation is just too good to be able to pass up. I would like to see something with Spirited Litany, instead of gaining Power Infusion, to maybe accelerate the cooldowns of our Holy Words or something along those lines. That would be very helpful. Furthermore, I think there needs to be another access point to this tree, or perhaps switching Pontifex, Resonant Words, and Lightweaver to like the inside of the tree and then moving Salvation to the outside, so that way it could be accessed by both Crisis Management and like Orison together. I think that might help quite a bit more in terms of this sort of clunky feeling between going from like a Prayer of Healing heavy build versus a single target heavy build, because one, the single target traits are all really good and really efficient, but for another, you're pretty much always taking Holy Word Salvation when it comes to a raiding environment, and there's really no downsides to it, making you push down this path no matter what all the time. And quite frankly, it's tough when you start looking at the competition between traits. Would you rather have more healing on targets that are below 50% are probably going to die? Of course you would, and you would actually rate that way more highly than getting a couple extra Holy Words over the course of an encounter with Harmonious Apparatus. Same thing with Say Your Prayers, having a slight chance to not consume a charge here and there, or just baseline getting more charges for your value, making your casts more efficient, your healing more efficient, making Benediction more efficient. All across the board. There's some very, very odd sort of groupings for these talents, where your Renew benefits from like Benediction kind of slope down into Renewed Faith, which guards Enlightenment for mana regen. But Enlightenment's just kind of pushed away into a corner, even though you'd probably want better mana regen for all kinds of content if you can. Meanwhile, you're always pushed into taking Benedictus's Cloak, which is wonderful, but it's a little bit strange to have to push through that, or take Benediction to take Divine Hymn. Not having Divine Hymn in like the first top area of the talents, again, feels kind of weird. So I do expect Holy Priest to go through another iteration for the setup, and I really do hope that Converted Followers is going to be another layer of raid utility, because I think Holy Priest Holy Priest Druid and Mistweaver are both in desperate need for some raid utility, and these new talent revamps are perfect for it. Finding reasons to specifically want a Holy Priest, specifically want a Mistweaver, specifically want a Rested Druid, I mean, I guess, would be fantastic, and that's one of the things I'd really like to see going forward into Dragonflight, is that these throughput healers finally having their day in the sunshine, because a lot of the tools that are coming to Paladins and Disc Priests, for example, are going to be incredibly hard to beat if things don't change. Overall, the gameplay for Dungeons was very encouraging, and I almost wonder if these benefits for AoE spells are just not quite enough from what we've been looking at thus far. We'll have to see when raid testing comes out, and I'll be sure to be updating more videos very soon, so be sure to check them out as well. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.